In the heart of Mwamba, a small but lively town surrounded by deep, mysterious forests, lived a girl named Immani. She was 16 years old, kind-hearted, and full of life. Everyone in the village admired her because she was always ready to help others. She had a warm smile and a gentle spirit that made people feel safe around her. But despite being loved by the townspeople, there was one person who despised her, her stepmother, Naya. Immani's life had once been filled with joy. She had a loving mother who cared for her deeply, and a father, Omari, who worked hard to provide for their family. But everything changed when her mother fell ill and passed away. The house that was once full of laughter became quiet and cold. Her father, broken by grief, felt lost without his wife. After some time, he decided to remarry, hoping to bring happiness back into their home. That was when Nia entered their lives. At first, Nia seemed kind and gentle, but as time passed, her true nature began to show. She was not the loving mother Omari had hoped for. Instead, she was cold and cruel, especially towards Immani. She treated her as if she were nothing more than a burden. But Omari, blinded by love and trust, did not see the darkness in Nia's heart. He believed that she cared for Immani, unaware of the storm that was slowly brewing in their home. From that moment on, Immani's life would never be the same. Life in Omari's house became a nightmare for Immani. From the moment Naya moved in, everything changed. At first, Naya pretended to be kind, but as soon as Omari was out of sight, her mask slipped. She turned into a cruel and heartless woman, treating Immani like a servant instead of a daughter. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, Immani was forced out of bed to begin her chores. She swept the entire house, fetched water from the well, and prepared breakfast, making sure Nia and Zalika had the best food on their plates. But she was never allowed to eat with them. Instead, she had to wait until they were done and eat whatever was left, if anything was left at all. Most days, she went to bed with an empty stomach. Zalika, Naya's daughter, was the complete opposite of Immani. She lived like a queen, dressed in the finest clothes while Immani wore old, torn dresses. She never had to lift a finger because her mother made sure Immani did everything for her. If Zalika's shoes were dirty, Immani had to clean them. If Zalika wanted water, Immani had to bring it to her. And if Zalika got bored, she would order Immani around just for fun. No matter how hard Immani worked, it was never enough. Nia always found a reason to punish her. If the floor wasn't clean enough, she would shout. If Immani took too long to finish a task, she would get slapped. If something broke in the house, Nia would blame Immani, even if she wasn't near it. The worst part was that Immani could never defend herself because Nia had a way of twisting everything. Immani tried to tell her father about Nia's cruelty, hoping he would protect her. But Omari never saw the truth. He spent most of his time working, and whenever he was home, Nia pretended to be the perfect wife and stepmother. Immani is stubborn, she would sigh, shaking her head. I try my best to guide her, but she never listens. She made Immani look like the problem, and Omari, exhausted from his long days, believed her lies. Whenever Immani tried to speak up, Omari would look at her with disappointment and say, "Listen to your stepmother, Immani. She only wants what's best for you." Those words crushed her more than any punishment Nia could give. As the days turned into months, Immani's once bright spirit began to fade. She was exhausted, hungry, and alone. But deep in her heart, she held on to one small hope, that one day the truth would come to light, and justice would be served. Nia had always hated Immani, but deep inside, she feared her. She knew that despite all the suffering she had caused, Immani was strong. The villagers loved her, and if Omari ever saw the truth, he might turn against her. Nia could not let that happen. She needed to destroy Immani's reputation, to make everyone believe she was a liar and a thief. So, she came up with a cruel plan. One evening, as the sun was setting over Mwamba, Naya suddenly screamed from inside the house. "My bracelet! My golden bracelet is missing!" she shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The bracelet was one of her most valuable possessions, a gift from Omari. Soon, villagers gathered outside, curious about the commotion. Nia stormed out of the house, pretending to be heartbroken. "Someone has stolen it," she cried. Then she turned to Immani, her eyes full of fake sorrow. Immani was the only one in the house. Who else could have taken it? Immani's heart pounded. "I didn't take it," she protested, her voice shaking. "I would never steal." But Naya shook her head and sighed dramatically. "Then where is it? Search her things if she is innocent." Before Immani could speak, Zalika ran into the house. Moments later, she returned, holding the missing bracelet in her hands. "Look, it was under Immani's sleeping mat," she announced, her face full of fake shock. Gasps spread through the crowd. The villagers who had always respected Immani now looked at her with doubt. Whispers filled the air. "She seemed like such a good girl," one woman murmured. "I can't believe she would do such a thing," another said. Immani felt tears sting her eyes. She knew this was a trap, but no one would believe her. She turned to her father, desperate for him to defend her. "Baba, please, you know I wouldn't do this." Omari's face was filled with disappointment. He looked at Naya, who wiped fake tears from her eyes, then at the villagers, who waited for him to speak. Finally, he sighed. "Immani, I don't know what to say. If you took it, just tell the truth." His words crushed her more than anything. He didn't believe her. He thought she was capable of stealing. "I didn't do it," she cried, but her voice was lost in the sea of judgment. Naya walked up to her, placing a hand on her shoulder as if she cared. "I won't punish you this time," she said sweetly, "but you must learn to be honest." The villagers nodded in agreement, believing Nia to be a forgiving stepmother. Immani, however, knew the truth. This was just the beginning. Nia wanted to destroy her completely, and she had succeeded in making everyone doubt her. As the crowd slowly left, Immani stood alone, her heart heavy with shame. She had lost something precious that day, not a bracelet, but the trust of those who once loved her. Nia's hatred for Immani only grew stronger after the bracelet incident. Even though Immani had done nothing wrong, the villagers now looked at her with suspicion. Nia had succeeded in ruining her reputation, but it wasn't enough. As long as Immani was alive, there was still a chance that Omari would one day see the truth. And worse, if anything ever happened to Omari, his wealth and land might go to Immani. Nia couldn't allow that. She wanted everything for herself and her daughter, Zalika. There was only one solution. Immani had to disappear forever. One evening, as Omari sat outside after a long day of work, Nia approached him with a worried look on her face. She sighed deeply, pretending to be troubled. "My husband, I am afraid for Immani," she began softly. Omari frowned. "What do you mean?" Nia shook her head, as if she didn't want to say it, then spoke in a low, serious voice. "The villagers whisper about her. They say that ever since the bracelet incident, she has been cursed by the spirits. They believe something terrible will happen if she stays in the village." Omari sighed, rubbing his temples. "These are just rumors, Nia. Immani is my daughter. I cannot throw her out." Nia's eyes darkened for a moment, but she quickly put on a sad expression. "I would never ask you to do that, my love," she said gently. "But I do have an idea. There is an ancient cleansing ritual that could remove her bad luck. She must go deep into the forest to gather sacred herbs. The elders say these herbs have the power to cleanse the soul and restore peace." Omari looked uncertain. "The forest is dangerous, Naya. Wild animals roam there, and people say spirits guard the deepest parts. What if something happens to her?" Naya placed a comforting hand on his arm. "She will be fine. She is strong, and the gods will protect her. If she returns with the herbs, the villagers will see she is pure, and their faith in her will be restored." Then she leaned in closer and whispered, "But if she fails, perhaps it is fate." Omari hesitated. Deep down, he still loved his daughter, but he was tired of the constant tension between her and Nia. Maybe this was the best way to bring peace to the household and the village. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Tomorrow, I will send her into the forest." A triumphant smile flickered across Nia's lips, but she quickly replaced it with a look of concern. "I only want what's best for her," she said sweetly. But in her heart, she knew the truth. The forest was no ordinary place. It was filled with dangers that no young girl could survive alone. And once Immani was lost in its depths, she would never return. Naya's problem would finally be gone forever. The next morning, Omari called Immani and told her about the sacred herbs. "You must go deep into the forest and find them," he said. "The villagers believe this will remove your bad luck." Immani's heart sank. She had never heard of such a ritual before, but she could see the doubt in her father's eyes. He no longer trusted her. She wanted to refuse, to tell him that this was another one of Naya's lies, but she knew it would be useless. So, she nodded and set off toward the forest, carrying only a small bag of food and a water gourd. As she walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, blocking out the sunlight. Strange noises echoed around her. Birds cawing, leaves rustling, and the distant growls of unseen creatures. But Immani was not alone. Unbeknownst to her, Nia had followed, hiding in the shadows like a snake waiting to strike. Hours passed, and Immani grew tired. She had wandered far, but she had not found any sacred herbs. As she stopped to rest near a river, Nia saw her chance. Silently, she stepped forward and kicked Immani's bag into the water. The gourd rolled away, sinking beneath the surface. Startled, Immani turned, but before she could react, Nia pushed her hard. She stumbled backward, her ankle twisting on a rock, and fell to the ground in pain. Nia smirked. "This is where your journey ends, Immani," she said coldly. "No one will find you here. You will starve, or the wild animals will take care of you." Immani's eyes widened in shock. "Mother, please! I am not your mother," Nia spat. "You should have never been born." Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Immani alone. Pain shot through Immani's ankle as she tried to stand. She was weak, hungry, and now without food or water. Fear crept into her heart, but she clenched her fists. She could not give up. If she stayed in one place, she would surely die. With great effort, she pulled herself up and limped forward, deeper into the unknown. She had only one goal: to survive. Days passed, and there was no sign of Immani. The villagers, who had watched her leave for the forest, expected her to return with the sacred herbs. But as time went on, whispers of concern spread through Mwamba. "Shouldn't she be back by now?" an old woman asked as she sat outside her hut. "The forest is dangerous," another villager murmured. "What if something happened to her?" At first, Nia pretended to be worried. She sighed and shook her head sadly whenever someone asked about Immani. "Perhaps she lost her way," she would say, placing a hand on her chest as if she truly cared. Or maybe the spirits did not accept her offering. Omari, however, did not seem troubled at first. He had convinced himself that Immani was safe, that she would return once she had completed her task. But as more time passed, doubt began to creep into his heart. He remembered the way Immani had looked at him before she left, her eyes full of sadness and fear. Had he made a mistake? One evening, as he sat outside his hut, a young boy ran up to him. "Baba Omari," he panted. "The hunters went deep into the forest today. They saw no sign of Immani, not even footprints." Omari's chest tightened. He turned to Nia. "You said she would be fine," he said, his voice shaking. Nia forced a sad expression. "I thought she would be," she said softly. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she didn't want to come back." Omari's heart ached at the thought. Would his daughter truly leave and never return? No, Immani was not that kind of girl. She loved her home, her people. Something was wrong. That night, Omari could not sleep. The guilt weighed heavily on him. What if Immani was out there, lost, hurt, or worse? Had he been blind for too long? The thought of losing his daughter forever sent a deep fear through his soul. The next morning, he made a decision. "We must search for her," he told the villagers. "We cannot leave Immani out there alone." For the first time, real panic flashed in Naya's eyes. She had never expected Omari to take action. If they searched for Immani, would they find out the truth? She clenched her fists, trying to hide her fear. The villagers gathered, preparing to enter the forest. Hope flickered in their hearts. But deep down, a terrible question remained. Was it already too late? Immani had been in the forest for days. She was weak, hungry, and in pain. Her ankle was badly swollen from her fall, and her body ached from sleeping on the cold, hard ground. She had tried to find food, but the fruits she came across were either too bitter or unsafe to eat. She drank water from a small stream, but it was not enough to give her strength. Her once bright eyes had grown dull, and her steps had become slower. Still, she refused to give up. She dragged herself forward, hoping she would find a way out. But with every passing hour, her strength faded. On the 5th day, as the sun burned high in the sky, her legs finally gave in. She collapsed beside a large tree, too tired to move. The world around her blurred, and darkness threatened to take her. Just when all hope seemed lost, voices echoed in the distance. The sounds of footsteps crunching leaves reached her ears. A group of hunters, dressed in animal skins and carrying bows, moved through the trees. They had been searching for game when one of them suddenly stopped. "Look!" he shouted, pointing toward the base of the tree. The hunters rushed forward and gasped when they saw the girl lying on the ground. Her face was covered in dirt, her clothes torn, and her lips cracked from thirst. One of the men knelt beside her and touched her forehead. "She's burning with fever," he said. "She won't survive much longer if we don't help her." Immani's eyelids fluttered. She could barely see them, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Summoning the last bit of strength she had left, she whispered, "My stepmother did this to me." Then everything went black. The hunters looked at each other in shock. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked. "She said her stepmother did this. We must take her back to the village," another said urgently. "The people must know the truth." Without wasting another moment, they lifted Immani's frail body and carried her through the forest. Their footsteps were fast, their hearts racing. They had set out that morning to hunt animals, but instead, they had found something far more important. They had found the truth. As they neared the village, the hunters knew one thing for sure. Once the people of Mwamba heard Immani's last words, everything would change. Back in the village, Nia walked around with a sorrowful face, sighing deeply whenever someone spoke about Immani. "I prayed for her safe return," she would say, shaking her head. "But perhaps the spirits have taken her." She spoke in a soft, broken voice, making it seem like she was heartbroken. Deep inside, however, Nia was not sad at all. She was relieved. Days had passed, and there was no sign of Immani. To her, this meant her plan had worked. Immani was gone forever. Now she only had to continue pretending to be a grieving stepmother, and no one would ever suspect her. Omari, however, was not at peace. Something inside him did not feel right. He had spent nights staring at the empty space where Immani used to sleep, thinking about the last time he saw her. The look in her eyes before she left haunted him. She had been afraid, but why? One evening, as he sat outside his hut, a group of women approached him. Their faces were filled with worry. "Omari," one of them said, "how can you sit here while your daughter is missing?" "We have never known Immani to be careless," another added. "She would never run away. Something is wrong." Omari sighed. He had been trying to push away his doubts, but the women's words only made them stronger. What if Immani had never intended to leave forever? What if something, or someone, had made sure she didn't come back? That night, he turned to Nia, watching her closely. She was sitting by the fire, calmly eating her dinner. She did not look like a mother who had lost her daughter. She did not cry. She did not even speak of Immani, unless someone else brought it up. Omari narrowed his eyes. "Nia," he said slowly, "are you truly not worried about Immani?" Nia looked up, pretending to be surprised. "Of course I am, my husband. But what can we do? The forest is dangerous. If she is meant to return, she will." Omari frowned. Something about her words did not sit well with him. For the first time, he wondered, had he been blind all along? Had he trusted the wrong person? Before he could ask another question, a loud cry echoed from the village entrance. "The hunters have returned, and they have Immani." Omari's heart pounded. He jumped to his feet as a crowd gathered. The hunters came rushing in, carrying Immani's frail body. She was barely breathing, her face pale and her lips dry. The village erupted in gasps and whispers. "She's alive," someone murmured. Naya's face turned white with shock. Immani was supposed to be dead. How had she survived? As the hunters placed Immani down, one of them spoke loudly, his voice filled with anger. Before she lost consciousness, she spoke. She said, "My stepmother did this to me." The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to Naya. Omari's blood ran cold. His hands clenched into fists as he slowly turned to face his wife. For the first time, Naya saw the look in Omari's eyes. Not love, not trust, but suspicion. The lies she had carefully built were beginning to crumble, and now the truth was about to come out. was. The villagers held their breath as the hunters carried Immani into the village. She was as light as a feather in their arms, her body weak and covered in scratches. Her clothes were torn, and her face was pale, but her chest still rose and fell. She was alive. Omari rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. His hands trembled as he touched her cold face. "Immani," he whispered, his voice filled with guilt and pain. "My child, can you hear me?" Immani did not respond. Her body was too weak, her strength drained after days of suffering in the wild. The villagers gathered around, whispering in shock. "She survived?" one woman gasped. "The spirits must have protected her," another murmured. Among the crowd, Nia stood frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was impossible. Immani was supposed to die in the forest. How had she survived? Panic crawled through her veins, but she forced herself to keep a calm expression. "We must take her to Zuberi," one of the hunters said. Zuberi, the village healer, was an old man with wise eyes and gentle hands. He had healed many people in Mwamba, and if anyone could save Immani, it was him. Without wasting time, Omari and the hunters carried Immani to Zuberi's hut. Inside, the healer examined her closely. He touched her forehead and frowned. "She has a high fever," he said. "She is weak from hunger and exhaustion. But she is a fighter. I can see it in her spirit. She will survive, but she needs time to heal." Omari let out a shaky breath of relief. He sat beside his daughter, holding her hand. Guilt weighed heavily on his heart. He had allowed himself to be blinded by Naya's lies. If Immani had died, it would have been his fault. He promised himself that he would never doubt her again. For days, Zuberi cared for Immani. He fed her small sips of herbal medicine, cleaned her wounds, and kept her warm. Slowly, the color returned to her face. The fever broke, and her breathing grew stronger. One evening, after nearly a week of rest, her eyes finally fluttered open. Omari, who had not left her side, gasped in relief. "Immani!" he cried, squeezing her hand. "You are awake!" Immani blinked, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. Then, as memories of the forest and Nia's betrayal flooded back, tears welled up in her eyes. She turned her head weakly and whispered, "Father, she tried to kill me." Omari's jaw tightened, his heart breaking. He had failed his daughter, but he would not fail her again. He turned toward the door, his eyes burning with fury. Naya's time of deception was over. The truth was about to be revealed, and justice would be served. The day Immani was strong enough to sit up, Omari knew it was time for the truth to come out. He sent word across the village, calling everyone to gather in the central meeting ground. The people of Mwamba, curious and eager for answers, came quickly. They had heard whispers of Immani's last words, but now they wanted to hear the full truth. Naya stood among the crowd, her heart pounding. She had tried to act calm over the past few days, but fear was creeping into her bones. Immani was alive, and if she spoke, everything Naya had built would come crashing down. Then, from Zuberi's hut, Immani appeared. She was weak, but her spirit was strong. Omari and Zuberi helped her walk, and the entire village watched in silence as she made her way to the center of the crowd. Her eyes, once filled with innocence, now burned with the pain of betrayal. Taking a deep breath, Immani turned to face the people she had known all her life. Her voice was soft at first, but steady. "My stepmother, Nia, tried to kill me." Gasps filled the air. The villagers turned to look at Naya, who took a step back, shaking her head. "That is a terrible lie," she shouted. "I loved Immani like my own daughter." But Immani did not stop. She sent me into the forest, knowing I would never return. And when I was lost, she followed me and abandoned me in the wild, leaving me to die. The hunters stepped forward. "It's true," one of them said. "When we found Immani, she was barely alive. Her last words were, 'My stepmother did this to me.'" Murmurs of anger and shock spread through the crowd. The villagers who had once trusted Naya now looked at her with suspicion and disgust. Immani's voice grew stronger. "She has treated me like a servant in my own home. She has lied to my father, and now she has tried to take my life." Omari clenched his fists. He turned toward Naya, his face dark with fury. "Is this true, Naya?" he demanded. Naya's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but there was none. The villagers were watching her with cold, accusing eyes. She opened her mouth to deny it again. But before she could speak, Zalika, her own daughter, suddenly stepped forward. "Mother," Zalika whispered, tears in her eyes. "Tell the truth." Naya's body stiffened. For years, she had controlled everything, weaving lies to protect herself. But now, her lies were falling apart, and there was no escape. The village fell silent, waiting for her response. But in their eyes, the truth was already clear. Nia's fate was sealed. A heavy silence filled the air. The villagers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on Nia. She looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone who might defend her. But there was no one. Even Zalika, her own daughter, had turned against her. The village elders, wise men and women who had guided Mwamba for years, stepped forward. Their faces were stern, their eyes filled with disappointment. One of them, Elder Jengo, spoke first. "Nia, you have been accused of great evil. You treated Immani with cruelty, abandoned her in the forest and tried to silence the truth with lies." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you deny these accusations?" Nia swallowed hard. Her mind raced, searching for another lie, another excuse. But she could see in the villagers' faces that it was useless. They no longer believed her. She was trapped. Before she could speak, Zalika stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I have to tell the truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to the elders. "My mother planned everything. She always hated Immani. She made her work like a servant while I did nothing. And when she feared Immani would inherit father's wealth, she decided to get rid of her." Zalika's voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "She told me not to say anything. But I cannot stay silent anymore. Immani nearly died because of us." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. The villagers looked at Nia with disgust. Some shook their heads, others whispered angrily. Omari's face was dark with anger and regret. "You betrayed our family," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "You made me believe your lies while my daughter suffered." Elder Jengo raised his hand, calling for silence. "Nia, your own daughter has confessed. There is no doubt left. The people of Mwamba do not allow such wickedness to go unpunished." Nia's legs trembled. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please have mercy," she cried. "I was only trying to protect my daughter's future." Elder Jengo's eyes hardened. "You did not try to protect your daughter. You tried to destroy an innocent girl. And for that, you must face justice." The villagers nodded in agreement. Some shouted angrily. "She must be punished," one man called. "She cannot stay among us," another woman added. Nia knew then that there was no escape. Her power, her lies, her control, everything was gone. The truth had won, and now she would face the consequences. Omari stood in the center of the village, his heart heavy with shame and sorrow. The truth had been laid bare before him, and he could no longer deny it. He had failed his daughter. He had been blind to Naya's cruelty, believing her lies while Immani suffered. And now, because of his mistake, his daughter had nearly lost her life. He turned to look at Immani, who sat weakly beside Zuberi. Her once bright face was pale, her body still recovering from the suffering she had endured. But despite her weakness, there was strength in her eyes. She had survived. She had fought against the cruelty she had faced. And he, her own father, had not been there to protect her. Omari's hands clenched into fists as he turned to Nia. She still knelt on the ground, her face streaked with tears. But he felt no pity for her. She had shown no mercy to Immani, and he would show none to her. With a voice filled with anger and pain, Omari spoke. "Nia, you have betrayed this family. You have filled my home with lies and cruelty. You tried to take my daughter's life, and for that, you can no longer stay in this village." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nia's eyes widened in horror. "No, please," she cried, crawling toward him. "Forgive me. I was blinded by fear and jealousy. I will change. Please do not send me away." But Omari shook his head. "You did not show Immani mercy when she begged for her life in the forest. You have no place here anymore." Elder Jengo stepped forward, nodding in agreement. "Omari has spoken. Nia, you are banished from Mwamba. You will leave at sunrise and never return." Tears ran down Naya's face as she realized her fate was sealed. She looked around desperately, but no one came to her defense. Even Zalika stood with her head bowed, refusing to meet her mother's eyes. Omari turned away, unable to look at her any longer. His heart ached with regret, not for Nia, but for the years he had wasted trusting the wrong person. He knelt beside Immani and took her hand gently. "My child," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I am sorry. I should have seen the truth. I should have protected you." Immani looked at him, pain and sadness in her eyes, but after a moment she squeezed his hand. "You see the truth now," she said softly. "That is what matters." Omari felt tears sting his eyes. He knew that he could never erase the past, but he vowed that from this moment on, he would never fail his daughter again. With Naya gone, a new peace settled over Mwamba. The darkness that had once filled Imani's home was lifted, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. But though her body healed, the scars in her heart remained. She had faced cruelty, betrayal, and near death. She could not forget what had happened, but she could choose what to do next. One evening, as she sat outside her father's hut, Omari joined her. His face was filled with sadness and regret. "Immani," he said softly, "I know I cannot change the past, but I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making it right." Immani looked at him for a long moment. She saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of a father who had realized his mistake too late. She could not hate him, even though he had failed her. She took a deep breath and said, "I forgive you, father, but I will never forget." Omari nodded, understanding her words. "That is fair," he said, "and I will work every day to be the father you deserve." As time passed, Immani grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. She no longer feared Nia's cruelty or the whispers of the past. Instead, she found a new purpose. She began visiting the children in the village who had lost their parents, those who were left alone just as she had once been. She shared her story with them, giving them hope and reminding them that they too could rise above their suffering. She asked the elders to help her create a safe place for abandoned children, a home where they would be cared for and loved. The village supported her, and soon, children who had once been forgotten found a family in Immani. She became a symbol of strength and kindness, a young woman who had suffered but refused to let her past define her. One day, as she watched the children playing near the river, she felt a deep peace in her heart. She had survived the darkness, and now she was bringing light to others. She smiled, knowing that this was her true purpose, to turn her pain into something beautiful. Immani had been tested, but she had not been broken. And now, her new journey had just begun. Nia walked alone through the dense forest, her feet sore and bleeding from the rough ground. The trees loomed high above her, their twisted branches blocking out the sunlight. The same forest where she had left Immani to die had now become her prison. She had begged the elders to let her stay in the village, but no one had come to her defense, not even Zalika. Her daughter had turned away from her, ashamed of the evil she had done. And Omari, the man she had deceived for years, had spoken the final words that sealed her fate. "You are banished. Never return." Now she had nowhere to go. At first, she told herself she would find another village, another place to start over. But the deeper she walked into the wilderness, the more she realized the truth. She was truly alone. The same fate she had planned for Immani had now fallen upon her. As night fell, the air grew colder. Strange noises echoed through the trees, distant howls, rustling leaves, the sharp cry of a hunting bird. Fear crept into her heart. She had once been powerful, controlling a household with her lies and cruelty, but now she was nothing. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and thirst burned her throat. She searched for food, but all she found were bitter roots and dry leaves. Every step she took was filled with regret. Why had she been so cruel? Why had she let her jealousy control her? Days passed, and her body grew weak. The same woman who once lived in luxury, who had made Immani suffer, was now suffering herself. She had no warm bed, no food, no one to call her own. One evening, as she sat under a tree, exhausted and hopeless, she realized that this was her punishment. She had destroyed herself with her own wickedness. The village of Mwamba had moved on without her, and she, Naya, would be nothing more than a forgotten shadow in the wild. Life in Mwamba slowly returned to normal. But something had changed. The people could not forget what had happened to Immani. They had once believed Nia's lies without question, turning against an innocent girl. They had ignored Immani's suffering until it was almost too late. Now, they realized their mistake. The elders gathered the villagers and spoke of the lessons they had learned. "We must never allow such cruelty to happen again," Elder Jengo said firmly. "We must listen, seek the truth, and stand against injustice, no matter who is involved." From that day forward, the village became a different place. People paid closer attention to the weak and helpless. If a child was mistreated, the villagers stepped in. If someone was accused unfairly, they asked for proof before judging. The suffering Immani had endured had opened their eyes, and they vowed never to turn a blind eye to injustice again. As for Immani, she became more than just a girl who had survived. She became a symbol of strength and truth. Parents told their children her story, warning them against jealousy, lies, and cruelty. Young girls looked up to her, admiring her bravery. The legend of Immani spread far beyond Mwamba, reaching other villages as a tale of resilience and justice. Immani, now strong and filled with purpose, continued to help abandoned children, offering them the love and care she had once longed for. Though she could never erase the pain of the past, she used it to build a better future, not just for herself, but for others as well. And so, the village of Mwamba changed forever, carrying Immani's story in their hearts, a reminder that truth and kindness will always overcome darkness.